I'm Janelle Stelton-Holtmeyer, editor of Modern Distribution Management, and today I'm talking with Diane Merrigan, director of the B2B division at Evo Platinum Services. Diane has more than 15 years in the business-to-business payments industry, specializing in the acquiring side of the process. And as a pioneer in her field, Diane was among the first to work with and educate merchants on B2B card acceptance, especially wholesalers and manufacturers. And recently, she has expanded her professional scope beyond accounts receivable to provide expertise to accounts payable departments as well. Welcome, Diane.
Thank you so much, Janelle.
We've heard a lot of news lately about credit card and data breaches at various retailers such as Home Depot and Target, just to name a few. But how big of a concern is online data security for distributors and other B2B companies?
That's a good question, Janelle. But before I talk about the present, I'd like to talk about the past for a little bit. When PCI came out in 2004, it threw a non-technical credit card processing sales reps into a technical conversation with merchants who did not want to discuss dispersing funds or IT's time toward something called PCI. And before I go further, let me explain a little bit about what PCI is. PCI is Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. It's a standard for organizations that handle credit cards, branded credit cards, American Express, Visa, MasterCard, Discover, JCB. And it's mandated, PCI standards are mandated by the card brands to increase controls around cardholder data and reduce credit card fraud. So there's a responsibility on a merchant's behalf to follow these guidelines and acquire systems and information and protect themselves from potential fraud. Of course, it wasn't all in the credit card processor's lap. The main responsibility fell on each individual company's desk. I wasn't comfortable selling this new concept of security. I was in the business of saving merchants money. And some merchants complied, while others didn't want to allocate funds and dip into their budget. Aside from my frontline conversation was the responsibility the ERP companies had to take. They were the ones that had to scramble to meet PADSS requirements, and that is the ERP or POS systems requirements that the card brands imposed on them, not the merchant. And some did it better than others by building the technology in-house, while many outsourced the card gateway system to a third party. This gave B2B merchants a sense of security that the responsibility was off their plate, and to an extent it still does today. Let's face it, small to medium-sized businesses do not have a large IT department or one at all. Currently, I'm in conversations with a merchant who is the president and acting IT department. What do you think is getting most of his attention? After review, he has data in the clear, a legacy ERP system, and no security awareness training going on for his employees. This is a company that grosses around $6 million a year. One of his hesitations is that his current ERP system ties back to his end-of-day totals, and his current ERP system's outsourced relationship does not provide a gateway that ties all balances. He doesn't want to spend the money to upgrade, and he certainly is not scanning his system. Then you add an e-commerce presence to all of this, and it's a recipe for disaster. Let's take a look at 2015 for B2B merchants. Margins are compressed, competition is fierce, relationships need to be nurtured, and B2B merchants are answering the call to modernize by updating their e-commerce sites so their customers can do research and purchase product quickly. According to Experian's second annual data breach industry forecast, with the deadline fast approaching for chip and PIN in 2015, data breaches will increase. So the question in my mind is, since 2015 has been labeled, quote unquote, the year of the breach, what are your subscribers, Janelle, doing to ensure that they haven't opened themselves up to more vulnerability? It's even more imperative to build out or update their security strategy. So where do they begin? The first order of business is to have the conversation about a security strategy, and specifically for our conversation today, a cybersecurity strategy. However, internal risk assessment and cyber risk assessment go hand in hand. If systems are not in place internally, then they certainly are not in place on your e-commerce site.
So in today's digital age, are data breaches basically inevitable?
That's the $1,000,000 question. In short, yes. The list is long on the various ways intrusions can happen. I was reading in Trustwave's 2014 Global Security Report. They cited various methods of intrusions. That is the way the attackers first gain access to a system. At the top of the list is weak passwords. This accounted for 31% of intrusions. Going down the line were file upload flaws, vulnerable off-the-shelf software, SQL injections, phishing, authorization flaw, and remote file inclusion. Email is another popular way of infiltrating networks. They also cited, I remember, that 85% of the exploits detected were third-party plugins. So that means Java or Adobe Acrobat. E-commerce made up 54% of assets targeted, and the e-commerce and website compromises rose by 5% in 2013. They don't have their 2014 Global Security Report out yet. That usually comes out the beginning of the second quarter. And point-of-sale breaches accounted for 33% of Trustwave's investigations. One point to note is these statistics are coming from known and reported breaches. There are that many more breaches that go unreported and worse, undetected. I read an article released yesterday by the Association for Financial Professionals that Obama is pushing for legislation that would mandate that companies notify the public within 30 days in the event of a security breach. My concern with that is any type of current investigation that's going on has to be resolved within 30 days, and most investigations are not resolved within 30 days. The whole point of investigation when a breach occurs is to get the bad guys and to stop the bad guys. So I don't know how well this legislation will fly, and we'll hear soon enough if it'll pass.
Talking about researching and talking about trying to find those breaches, how can we know if we've been attacked, or what systems can be put in place to protect ourselves and respond?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, internal risk assessment goes hand in hand with cyber risk assessment. Systems have to be in place in order to detect intrusions. There is an overflow from one to the other. I'd like to delve into the key factors that, if followed, would alert B2B merchants should an intrusion occur. But I believe we have to start at the beginning, and that comes with the buy-in and strategic planning. So for a business moving through 2015, security has to be part of the budget. There needs to be an organization-wide approach to managing risk, and risk needs to become part of the culture. Internal security and cybersecurity have earned their place on the board of directors, CEOs, presidents, or mom-and-pop shops' annual budget meeting. Which brings me to the question of, what's the cost of a breach? There's a long answer and there's a short answer. I'll give you the short answer and I'll allude to the long answer. The short answer is as stated by the Poneman Institute, who does yearly surveys and asks companies what they estimate a cost of a breach to be, says, as of 2013, the average cost of a breach is about $199 per record. However, the short answer to the long answer, let's put it that way, is each business has to calculate how much an asset is worth to them. For example, if a record is lost from your largest customer and you lose that customer due to a breach, what is that worth to you? Also, we need to recognize on the people side, we're reading more and more about business leaders that are forced out when breaches occur. So it really behooves upper management to create an environment where all departments are working together to add this risk assessment to part of their annual budget and to pay attention to the new guidelines that they are going to be implementing. The second thing is a business has to understand its current risk landscape. The National Institute of Standards and Technology put out a paper entitled The Framework for Improving Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity. I really feel this cybersecurity, this framework, will work not just when focusing on cybersecurity, but also on internal risk security processes that you're trying to put into place. While these guidelines are to be used by corporate directors to measure against current internal policies for cybersecurity, it really applies, like I had just said, across the board for all security. So I'm really going to answer your question at this point. In section 3.2 of the report, they give 6 steps on how they think an organization can use what they're calling the quote-unquote framework to update or create a new cybersecurity program. Now, I understand a lot of the listeners are small businesses, and so sometimes when we talk about security, it's very overwhelming, just like the story that I had mentioned about a merchant I'm in conversations with. He's very overwhelmed, and to discuss where your data is, he doesn't even know where to begin. But there does have to be a starting point. And to take a deep breath and to sit back and to kind of go through this process, it doesn't have to be as technically challenging as it might sound when I lay it out. The whole point of it is to make it so that it's user-friendly and it's used as a guideline to continue to update and take a look at and research and inform for your security system in your business. So the first thing within this framework is identify. The organization needs to identify its mission objectives, related systems, assets, regulatory requirements, and what's your overall risk approach. For small businesses, that risk approach, those assets, those related systems, your network system, your mobile system if you allow that, those are going to be different than for medium and larger businesses. So everybody's going to have a different list. Step 2 is to create a current profile. What is a current profile? What does the landscape look like? That's usually categorized by what you already have identified through your related systems and your assets, etc. What is the cybersecurity or organization security outcome based on what they've already implemented? So what do you currently have in place to protect yourself? How are you training your employees? Do you have a training program? What is your current landscape look like? That's what number 2 is. Number 3, this leads to conducting a risk assessment, which is a list, which means the organization needs to analyze the operational environment in order to discern the likelihood of a security or cybersecurity event. And what does that impact look like? What's going to happen to your company if there is a breach? So you have to conduct this risk assessment. It extends to, for example, something as simple as an employee not having training. That's a risk. Not having security training for your employment, having awareness of what suspicious activity looks like. I was talking to a peer of mine, and he was telling me a story about a recent breach. There's a large hotel chain that had just put their employees through security awareness seminar, and it was the front desk employee, not the IT person, but the front desk employee that detected suspicious activity. He was standing at his computer at the front desk, and his cursor on the computer started to move by itself. He watched it for a while thinking someone was playing a joke on him, but then realized this was unusual and contacted their IT department that through due diligence discovered a security breach. If that employee hadn't been trained, he might not have been as aware and cognizant of what to do. Number 4 on the list of this quote-unquote framework is create a target profile. So thus far, an organization has identified objectives, systems, assets, to name a few, in the current environment. Then in the target profile, they paint the picture of what they want their cybersecurity or internal security outcome to look like. Will they allow peripheral devices to purchase from their system? What will the employee awareness training look like? Will we provide mobile devices to our employees, or will they BYOD, which is a term, bring your own device? Who is responsible for updates, patches, contracts with outsourced providers? So you create what this picture looks like of how secure you want your system to be and what that looks like. Number 5 is determine, analyze, and prioritize gaps. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where you prioritize, you determine resources necessary to address the gaps, create an action plan, do a cost-benefit analysis, understanding of risk to achieve the outcomes you identified. Now, I know some of this sounds boring to a small business. My father owned an industrial chemical company for 41 years. Since it was a small business, the people he would need to pull in to his group to do this type of analysis would be his computer guy. It wasn't necessarily a titled an IT person. It would be upper management, which would be himself and his partner, an office manager who knows the ins and outs of really what emails are coming in, of the daily tasks that are at hand in the office, his computer person, and most likely a sales rep. What's going on out there? What's the environment out there? Are you using your mobile device quite often? Are you getting your emails from your mobile device? Are you forwarding on emails from your mobile device? So a small business, like I had said, is going to have a different risk analysis than for, say, let's say, a large business. Number 6 on this framework is implementing an action plan. And it's just as it sounds. This is where you monitor, you hold responsible those identified for specific tasks, and circle back around over and over again. These 6 systems, if you delve into them and you apply them, there will be a stronghold that nobody can get through. Because you're layering at this point. When you follow these systems, you realize where are the holes, the gaps in our organization. Where do I need to fill in those gaps? It's not just through your POS provider that you're protected. You have to protect yourself from employees opening emails that have spam, that have links to get into your system. You have to protect yourself from customers going on the website and inputting incorrect data. I tried to keep this as simple as possible because there is so much detail that goes into the 6 points, but the detail is applicable to each business size. So when a small business owner is listening to this, I don't want them to become overwhelmed. I want them to take action. They need to protect themselves just as much as the large business. I know we hear on the news all about large businesses. They're the ones that get the high-profile news reports. But it's the small businesses that really need to protect themselves, and they're low-hanging fruit. Your reputation, you work too hard to maintain, obtain, and create new relationships to lose it all because you didn't pay attention to something that needs to be part of your budget for 2015 and going forward.
Well, those sound like some great starting points. So if distributors want to learn more about how to protect themselves, is there some place where they can go?
There's a couple of places. I really liked the National Institute of Standards and Technology paper, the Framework for Improving Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity. And I know it's specific to cybersecurity, and I know our conversations about cybersecurity, but I really liked their article. I think it applies across the board. TrustWave, you can go to www.trustwave.com. They have a lot of wonderful information. They are the top assessor out there. They are always updating the latest and greatest information of how to protect yourself and the steps you need to take. PCI, you go to the PCI website. That also is chock full of information. And it breaks it down for merchants. So that's what I like, is that they have an actual tab that you can click on that says merchants. And that's you. Those are the tabs that you need to be clicking on because they simplify everything. But you need to just start having a conversation. And whether it's with your partner, your business partner, or your computer guy, or your IT person, the conversation needs to happen now.
Well, that gives us a lot to think about. So thank you so much for your time today, Diane.
You're welcome. Thank you, Janelle.